Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Dell's UK Country Head of Marketing, Simon Hall, on Dell's content journey, shifting from product-focused to content-centric campaigns. Before we go further, I'd just like to highlight a few housekeeping points and let you know how you can participate in today's session. The webinar will last for approximately 1 hour. All attendees are on mute to avoid background noises that may distract you from listening, so the only voices you should hear throughout the webinar will be mine and Simon's. You have the ability to ask questions using your chat box. Simply type in your question and click Submit. Then, at the end of the presentation, we will do an interactive Q&A session and take as many of your questions as we have time for. Lastly, we will send you a link to the recording of the event in the next couple of days so that you can share it with your colleagues. You also have access to it via our opinion page. Anyway, I won't take up any more of your time, so over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Michelle. So, just a little bit of background just to give you context of the title, the product to customer-centric marketing. So I joined Dell about 5.5 years ago, and one of the things that I think was good was that there was an appetite to sort of talk about a little bit differently about the way we're articulating information and messaging already back then to customers. Clearly, when we looked at the marketing output and deliverables to sales, it was at that point quite product-centric, despite the fact that Dell had moved to being more of an end-to-end solution provider, and certainly set up to be focused around the customer. So I want to talk to you today a little bit about where we're at today and give you a few examples and insights on how on some of the things we've been doing last year or two. I don't want to make it a sort of make this as an only pitch about Dell. I want to more just share with you kind of the learning from a marketing point of view, and I'm sure some of you can relate to some of this if you've gone through similar journeys, which I would expect you have done. So let me just move to the next slide. I think for those of you who've been talking to some of the research companies and looking at research, this would not be a surprise. So at the top left, you'll see the customer journey. Some of you have been in the industry a while. You all remember the times when customers would pretty much come to sales when they were interested in a project, and they would already probably at evaluation stage engage a vendor. That's changed dramatically. So these days, customers self-educate more, self-inform, join forums, they're more accessing content and information, whether it's social platforms or whether it's just online. So there's a lot going on from a customer point of view in the evaluation, defining project and gathering info stage before they even pick up the phone to a vendor or even talk to a vendor. So this is really important that marketing appreciates that as well as sales. So it's not just a marketing relevance here. And the bottom is more about talking about those journey stages in a little bit more detail. So repeating the same, but for sales and marketing, really critical that we understand where the customers go to, how they gather information, and how we influence the influencers and third-party spaces and on the online content spaces where customers go to. So let me move forward to the next slide. This is kind of some of the digital habits we've seen as a bit of the backbone of what we're seeing from customers. So 60% are doing research before engaging. Depending on whether you talk to Forrester, Serious Decisions, or other types of companies, it's anything between, it's around about the 60% mark. 93% of customers do digital research, mostly via search. So, that certainly will shape search spend. And as you go down, the interesting thing is 91% are searching on mobile devices. Now, this refers to B2B audiences, not consumer, which might be surprised as you see some of these high numbers. But certainly, this is what we're seeing. I think the other one is 6% search and read peer reviews. So peers are really important in influencing. And then we've seen a 57% increase in content spend, keeping up with demand. That's probably more at the industry level. This is probably what some of our customers do feel on the next slide. is just the sheer amount of information. So a couple of things that are probably worth considering is customers are turning more to easy, not just snackable or bite-sized pieces of content, but using video to quickly get a feel for learning about a particular topic or doing research or gathering information. So video is becoming really important. So 1 in 3 B2B customers turn to video here, and then 1 in 4 purchasing via mobile device. Just want to move to the next slide. So here's probably some interesting things that come out of research from different forums. So B2B buyers need more reassurance than B2C as decisions may affect their career. So this is all about the emotional connection and emotional tie-in from customers. And some of you may think your consumers would get more emotional. Well, the strange thing is there's a lot more at stake with the B2B buyer. If you think that B2B buyers in an organization with ITDMs or whatever who are signing the checks for these infrastructure, certainly an area that it can be anything up to 100,000 or more. Even we've seen in projects up to about 500,000. These are pretty big projects and they're pretty big outlays of money. Anything going wrong would impact credibility of that buyer, impact probably the business, and probably impacts their career opportunities moving forward. So you can see that the emotional connection in a B2B purchase can be really, really high. So that's really important when you think about how you want to reach new B2B buyers and acquire or ask them to take up an area of an area that they may not have purchased from you as a vendor. Those sort of factors become really important in reassuring the buyer. So again, thinking about that customer-centric piece. And I just wanted to sort of talk about my thing that keeps me up at night is how do I change the perception out in the market. So, interesting enough, if I go out in the street and I'll talk to anyone and they'll say, oh, where do you work? You say, I work at Dell, the first thing they turn around and say, oh, you sell PCs. The funny thing is, we were more than a PC provider already 10 to 20 years ago. And 10 years ago, we invested in, 40% of our workforces or employees are in pure services. We acquired over 20 different areas of businesses to help support our end-to-end solutions, and there's software and services. We have a huge array of things in software services, large infrastructure, so we're not just a PC provider. So global research is telling us that still 90% of businesses think we just sell notebooks or PCs. So that's something that for me is really important that I need to change as a perception, and that kind of then underpins what I'm doing within the marketing space. So again, I don't want to make this a sales pitch, certainly not that, but I'm just trying to give you sort of a bit of background where we're going with our projects. So let me just talk through maybe the first one, which is the Commonwealth Games sponsorship. So about 3 years ago, actually 4 years ago now, 3 years ahead of its time of the Commonwealth Games, so around about 2011, I reviewed a contract to then participate as a sponsor of the Commonwealth Games. Obviously making sure that I got sign off at the highest level so that, with the fact that you're doing something 3 years out, things can really change. So, of course, but I didn't believe things would change that much. 1 year later, my budget was cut in half, and 2 years later, I was told to put more focus on the business space than anything on consumer. So massive shifts in budgeting, proved a challenge. So I looked at where we wanted to go with the sponsorship deal, and then looked at what were my objectives in terms of looking at customers. So I think, the thing that clearly was a big one was changing that perception, as I just mentioned. But, outside of that, it's how we showcase technology, increasing, positioning ourselves as the IT solution provider, but also generating excitement and a winning culture within internal to Dell. Obviously, This is based out of Glasgow, and we have a big office in Glasgow. And the key thing here was how do we improve morale and then internally, and how do we build that up as well. So there were kind of 4 areas as well as this internal piece. And then on the next thing I was really thinking about was how do we go about creating content. Now, as it was a Commonwealth Games piece, it was very much UK or UK only, and there wasn't really the content coming from global that we normally rely on for other areas. And those of you who work in large corporations could relate to the fact that you typically rely on this this content that comes from a central space. So we need to look at how do we create content locally. So we looked at sort of core stories that we could, and themes that we build around, and those are around the customer. So things that designing the scale. So how do our business customers scale? And then various sub-themes around that. And then how how do people work in remote environments and stay connected? So the thing that I probably should have mentioned was that part of our deal with the Commonwealth Games, we set up the entire infrastructure for the Commonwealth Games. So we, for their help desk and support system, over 2,000 PCs and about 40 servers, various server support and software that we provided to the whole back-end infrastructure came from Dell. And we were able to talk about different things that were revolving around the Commonwealth. So some of you who may have been there, there was the athletes village where all the athletes would go to. We used that as a story to talk about connectivity and remote connection and talking about mobility. And then on the designer scale, how we build that back-end infrastructure and backbone to the games. And then we were also having various what we call ambassadors that were actually athletes themselves that were participating that we sponsored. And we thought these were sort of good elements of the branding and the brand plan. So in the next slide here, you'll see kind of one of the examples of a simple piece of advertising around the Athletes Village. Caroline Rogers there was actually the whole accommodation manager, site manager for the Athletes Village, and we had her sort of share how she was using technology and Dell technology to stay connected, stay on top of things, and project manage everything. As obviously you remember, this is something that we had to do right up to the games when this was just a building site. So some interesting stories that were coming out of this, and we were again keeping it focused on the customer. We then thought, okay, listen, one of the big things we thought we could really build on was our social cadence, and looked at how do we really drive the message out on social media a lot more. So this is kind of the structure and process that we went through to create a social plan. So we organized content into those key themes. We had a few core themes. We had the entire business, including sales, operations, everyone within the business really unifying around this content calendar that was created by month and also by week. And then we created the cadence for reviewing the content and for sharing that content. And that was even down to who shares content on a daily basis. To kind of amplify and extend the reach of this, we used our ambassadors and some key stakeholders. And then we monitored social media engagement. The great thing was something as what could be elusive and sort of far-reaching as social, by clearly structuring it in this way, we achieved success. So we probably spent anything 20 times less than some of the bigger players around the Commonwealth in terms of spend. As I mentioned at the very start, we had a huge cut on the spend, unlimited. But we managed to achieve #1 social sponsor for the entire Commonwealth Games, which is something I'm certainly proud of to achieve, not just for myself, but obviously through a whole extended team that were working around this, including agencies. So very much something that paid off. And then one of the things I sort of talked to you about just at the start was one of the big things was change in perception. So what you'll see there is a number of questions in a survey that we had done before and after, and we looked at sponsorship impact. So if you take something like the third one along, Dell's credibility as an enterprise-level service solution provider, the dark bar is the all decision makers who may not have seen anything about Commonwealth Games or any of the content, and the light bar is the ones that have definitely seen the content coming out of the Commonwealth Games. So as you can see, massive uplifts in the perception between those who had seen it and those who hadn't seen it. That told me that the content was working, the messaging, the approach was working. However, would have liked to have seen a lot more marketing budget, as I'm sure you all would, in actually achieving more reach from this content. So just giving you a bit of a snapshot there on what the Commonwealth Games was all about. So something that you probably would see at the outset saying this is very much a consumer play. We made sure that it was very much a business-focused themes, business-focused reach, and really just improving that credibility piece. So that was all of the work done around the Commonwealth Games. And I want to turn to another sort of project, which is what I've called the Solutions Guide or Solution Program. And this is kind of born out of our public marketing space. So just a bit of background, going back 3 or 4 years, we actually didn't do any marketing in the public space. And for those of you working in public, there's a bit of complexity in messaging. There's a lot of the larger public deals are going through what they call large framework agreements, where you certainly can't. Large framework agreement providers can't be biased, and they're there as neutral, arbitrary bodies to actually guide people in healthcare, government, education, higher education, on what they should be considering and give them advice on types of vendors. But it's not one vendor that they've got to recommend. So it's about being fairly neutral from the large framework agreement providers. So that is where we certainly were very much product-y in our messaging, in our content. The stuff that we were getting was certainly not resonating with the customers, and certainly not talking their language. So it's an area that we need to fix. So I had somebody come on board who sort of helped me in this and did a great job of sort of driving this forward. And we set about looking at how we created content in general. So one of the things we noticed was that within the public sphere, the collaboration with sales is even more important. So even if you may need to do it anyway in any sphere, in public was absolutely critical. And the reason for that is the language and taxonomy is very different, and it differs also across regions. So you may say things K-12 in the US. It doesn't mean anything to anybody in education within the UK. And a lot of that taxonomy was very different. The second thing is the government bodies in healthcare and higher education really want to understand about solutions. And the solutions that we as an IT solution provider, we may think are end-to-end solutions, but the reality was that the end-to-end solutions that people in the healthcare bodies and healthcare establishments are looking for were more cure for cancer, reducing patient queues, where maybe the actual IT part did help achieve those things, but it was something they were trying to understand how it actually benefited and achieved those results. So very much a different type of solutions conversation. So we thought, okay, listen, we need to really make sure we get the specialists into a conversation. We need to make sure that they're clearly highlighting what customers are saying. We need to have a loop into customers. And we asked an agency to really facilitate this so that it wasn't marketing with marketeers around a table and creating some content, but it was sales who were really bringing the voice of the customer and what they were seeing to the table a lot more, and having probably more than an equal voice in creating that content. And that was a different approach. And some of you who are trying to crack the code on some of the content, I think this is probably for us, certainly in the UK marketing, was a big change. And from that, we started it from one area. We started off with things like education solutions to create this content, easier to read, broke it down into simple pictures, very much looking at, talking about usage models and real solutions, talking about highlighting customers and what customers themselves are looking for. And this whole solution program was looked at, benefiting of 3 work groups to create that. And then along the whole process of creating this content, we were involving the customers themselves to test that. So what I would say, the sort of 6 prongs or 6 areas, I'd say, of the creating content was customers. So generating language that customers could connect to and really connect with. So the language, the input in their stories. The integration of services, software and hardware. Focusing really on the concerns of the customers. The richer content was really key. So looking at how do you make sure this content is richer, not only in using diagrams and highlighting simply how an end-to-end solution could help the business, but also looking at richer content from a video point of view, from an online usage, and socializing that as well. And then sales with their view on commercial propositions and making it really relevant locally through local customers and local platforms or forums to then share this. So that was what I would say would be some of the key things that really helped in creating the content. And then a little bit of an example on the next slide of that. Obviously, the main hub of this was the solution guide, but then it was very much then amplified or optimized, if you want to call it, through different types of content. So the iPapers, which is sort of more online papers, CEO types, 2 pages, infographics, social maps, and then amplified through social media platforms. So what did this really achieve then? So I think, a couple of things that I would say, she certainly opened a lot of doors. Certainly allowed us to sort of gain credibility in this space a lot more. There was a couple of stories we had, and they keep coming in quarterly, but one really interesting one was for 2 years we had a salesperson in the government space who was trying to open the door to a local government establishment and really wasn't able to sell beyond some PCs. And finally, he took this solution guide and left it on the desk of the IT decision maker. And a gentleman who rarely ever picked up the phone to this gentleman decided to pick up within that same evening, called our representative and basically said they were interested in these broader solutions. We're kind of interested by the fact that this guide had highlighted a lot more than what he was aware of. He wanted this sales leader to go in and account manager to go in and sort of talk through more about what they could offer that establishment. And then 2 months later, there was a deal of about $500,000 placed against a whole array of different software and services. And he came in. I asked the gentleman to come in and talk to our EMEA marketing leadership team and share that as clearly it was one example of where solutions content was really adding value. I think the other interesting result was we saw some interesting best practice response. We've had other countries pick this up from the UK, and we had even the US decide to take this as a best practice globally to then leverage for the US, which is probably a first, as usually it goes the other way around, where US best practice that come to regions in EMEA if you're a US type company. So again, I think it's about talking the customer language, and this is what really paid off in this instance. So I wanted to talk finally on security solutions. I think I mentioned that we've done investment across some key areas, and there's probably 4 or 5 core areas that I work across now. There's cloud, mobility, big data, what I call convergence of the server, storage, and networking convergence, and then security. And I thought it would be good to talk through with you the security campaign that we kicked off in November last year. It was really to, up until last November, we typically either invested on a pure awareness spend was either at an overarching level or had been in consumer, but had not actually yet touched in a large-scale end-to-end solutions. So this is the first in EMEA and in the UK, and the UK sort of led the way with a security solutions campaign. So that's the first point. The next point is that certainly if I looked at my marketing budget, I didn't have the luxury that I would have had if I was in consumer of just going broad and spending on TV and out of home and you know, some of the larger spend items. I didn't have that luxury to go and spend it. I had a small amount of budget, and I needed to make some choices. I needed to make some choices on who influences this customer, who influences the purchase, where would I need to really put my dollars in a more targeted manner to get the most out of security solutions. So it's really understanding that piece. And so that's certainly one thing to depart for a moment. The next thing was in terms of the content was, if I look at different types of customers and what they want, they're really interested in research, really interested in reading up on an industry type paper, but in different, using different types of forms of content. So we decided earlier last year to commission at global level a study from Ransom Vaughan, did third-party research across the globe. There was over 200 UK companies involved, and these key findings were then captured and then put together in a paper. Those findings were then translated into campaign content in terms of messaging, content, format. We then prepared a media plan and looked at media mix. We decided to roll out, and then obviously we did the whole, we did the whole piece in terms of monitoring and measuring that. So I think, interesting enough, we decided really key here was to look at C-suite and spill over into BDMs. We felt C-suite were earlier on in the decision cycle. They had a broader outlook on what was required for the business, so they probably could take a more balanced approach in terms of investment. And, we looked at obviously at themes in the security space for which we could answer through our solutions. And here's the interesting thing is, as some of you who probably are very much aware of, is the whole journey that customers take is consuming content in different ways, and it's not a linear content consumption approach. So here's just an example of kind of not necessarily a persona, but somebody, an example of somebody using content. So Sally searching security solutions by Google, visits the company's website, looks at a banner, clicks on that banner, receives information on an event, may attend an event. She reaches out to with further questions and get answers to those questions, and then comes to an account team. So you can see the different types of journey a customer made, but that's probably more linear than even the reality today, which is interesting. So, and that's obviously looking at different types of content at different points in time. So these are sort of research that we looked at to understand sort of content consumption. Other pieces of research were telling us that customers were consuming anything up to 7 pieces of content before they made a decision. So a lot of this research was then pointing to the fact that we needed to have a good content portfolio. So we looked at creative formats to appeal to C-suites and BDMs. So looking at standard display, but display obviously in different formats. Rich media, and this is something we looked at locally, looked at rich media to create sort of rich video content, and not necessarily that expensive. Infographics, obviously a big win, but teaming up with companies like IDG to create infographics. Programmatic, so sort of more the automated approach to digital, and looking at paid social as well as content distribution. So those are a number of things that we looked at to really make this whole approach a bit more effective. Here's an example of one area. So the IDG advertisement was something we looked at. and we measured it across all different areas of interaction rate, video play rate, dwell duration. So interesting enough, the key metrics were telling us that when we measured this, we saw that we had higher interaction rate than the benchmark. We had a 700% higher video play time than our benchmark, a higher dwell time, about on track, I would say, and then about 6.1 million impressions delivered. And the benchmarks were actually based on B2B statistics. We engaged sort of a whole media agency around this as well. So they really showed that the richer content and the content co-creation locally really drove some fantastic engagement metrics. And then we obviously looked at top performing websites of where we placed this content, and then the continuity went through this whole recommendation approach as we moved from month to month on this one. We saw then the content that was coming to our own content websites, and not the Dell.com, but we had a separate website called Tech Page One that was more around content consumption and less around our usual Dell.com type pages. We saw 100 leads incrementally per week coming through. Those leads were admittedly marketing-ready leads, which need to be nurtured, but still a massive uptick, and a 1,500 month-on-month uptick in visits to our that content website. So it certainly was paying off. And as we went through the whole journey of content and content creation and auditing, we were really developing a lot of learnings. And then on the next slide, you can see here, these were some learnings that we implemented, a cadence that was in weeks. So what you can see here is that we had A/B testing. And the A/B testing was actually against themes and titles. So at a title level and at a content level within the write-ups, we were looking at it on a Monday and Tuesday, looking at interaction, engagement metrics, and then choosing the best of those pieces of content that were placed on LinkedIn and other places, but mainly LinkedIn. What would be the best content that we needed to go for the last 3 or 4 days of the week to then push out there. So that A/B testing really helped us, and this is something that obviously was earlier on in Q1 of this year, we were testing out. So again, continuously developing that learning cycle and feedback loop. This is the sort of stuff that we were engaging with LinkedIn on, and LinkedIn were really helping us really get into that C-suite database a lot more on job function, location, industry, and company size. And this really helped us influence our media strategy, media plan, as well as content plan. And LinkedIn was only one part of this, of course, but certainly important in that social media activation where budgets are a bit slimmer. And then just maybe to sort of bring it home, summary in terms of the results, we saw 73% reach. So we actually wanted to go out to C-suites to maximize our reach based on limited spend. We actually achieved our target goal of over 70% reach with a 6 to 7 frequency. So they were seeing content 6 to 7 times. And as I mentioned, 6 to 7 times was the amount of times a customer would consume content or see types of content before they engage or made a decision. We feel we achieved that target there. The advertising delivery was 47 million impressions, 1.9 million search impressions, and then we obviously had Outbrain, which is this technology for pushing content. Our security solutions page on our Dell.com, we saw visits going up, visits per week of 2,500. That wasn't the site I was mentioning where we had visits of 1,500. This is the actual security solutions page. The average time on site was 1 minute and 38 seconds. May not seem a lot, but actually a lot when you consider that it would be near to zero for this type of information. And we had 1.46 average page views per visit. So customers probably most customers were between 1 and 2 pages they were clicking on as they read up on the security solutions. So we feel it was a pretty successful first start on end-to-end solutions campaigns. A lot of learnings coming out of it. I think the thing for me would be knowing the customer, knowing the content, and knowing how customers can consume content was really critical to making this a success, but obviously a milestone in a journey in terms of pure awareness campaigns around the sort of end-to-end solution space. I'm going to leave it there, actually. I know I finished 10 minutes earlier. Hopefully I've given you a taste of a journey in marketing that I'm working in, and the 2 or 3 pieces of case studies that maybe hopefully give you something in terms of takeaways. I'm going to hand it back to Michelle for potentially any questions.
Thank you, Simon. We have been receiving a number of questions throughout the webinar, which I'd like to put forward to you. So the first question is, did you see a direct impact on your sales revenue as a result of your sponsorship at the Commonwealth Games?
So, good question. So obviously it's a brand. There was always the major part of this investment on the Commonwealth Games was brand. And as the focus of the brand, as some of you are aware, that as you move from an awareness part of the funnel to a purchase, that can take anything up to 2 years in terms of things like infrastructure deals. There was a part of the Commonwealth Games where we made sure that we aligned to pipeline, and a pipeline in terms of acquisition and share of wallet, and we absolutely did see some really good return on the dollar spend on activities related to pipeline. So this could be an event that we brought customers to webinars, lead generation activities, again, sort of door open activities, and absolutely some really good return on pipeline. I'm not going to divulge figures for confidentiality reasons, but definitely a success on that side as well.
And our next question is kind of related to that last one. It asks, how do you measure the impact of sponsorships?
So that was, you can measure in different ways. I think the challenging piece on things like sponsorship is obviously the minimum that you should look at into the ratios that I keep hearing is a 2 to 1. So if you spend $1 million in a sponsorship, you need to be prepared to spend $2 million on activation. That's apparently the minimum in terms of the ratio. So really critical that you're getting that return. How we measured the sponsorship impact, again, was the pipeline piece I just mentioned, but the 2 core areas were brand tracker. So having a brand tracker that covered off a number of areas in terms of perception. The survey and the results I mentioned in the slide earlier on there was that content survey, so those who had viewed content, those who hadn't. And then we actually had a whole social reporting around the Commonwealth Games, around a lot of the content going through social websites and our Twitter website. And that was picking up on all the different metrics that was obviously built off the back of Radiant 6. So Twitter reach and influence and all that sort of stuff. So all that sort of good stuff. So a number of areas, and I think the important thing is always have a consolidated scorecard around this. I think the brand tracker was the most successful, and unfortunately that had to be invested in at a local level. It was very much set up based on some standard questionnaires that we did before and after, so you can sort of almost litmus test where you're going based on sort of a baseline, what you had beforehand versus after. So a lot of learning there in terms of measurements.
Our next question has asked, what was the decision-making process behind selecting the Commonwealth Games as a platform?
A good question. So I think there were the initial let's say engagement piece of the Commonwealth Games was through the body that was behind the Commonwealth Games. And they came to us, I think in September of 2011, and we looked at the fees to engage. It was going to be really expensive. We actually rejected it at that point. And then we had our sales guys get involved and look at it, what we call a value in kind approach. So we were then obviously providing the infrastructure and the whole setup around the IT infrastructure. And then we evaluated it based on the value in kind coupled with marketing budget. The feeling was there were a number of areas that we still needed to crack as a business. There was more reach into the northern and Scotland region in the UK. From a business point of view, we were underpenetrated. We felt there was going to be a good sort of morale issue. I thought this was going to be quite a successful platform from a sports point of view in terms of reach. I mean, everyone, certainly off the back of the Olympics, you remember 2012, there was a just general uptick in people's engagement around sport and health and lifestyle. And as a roll-up to that, there was obviously a sensation that there was an increasing appetite for that. And therefore, this as a platform would have been really interesting. I think the other thing was that with the ability to actually provide this infrastructure, we were able to then talk a story that was very different. So that end-to-end solutions messaging was something that we could actually realize as part of this brand campaign. So all of those things coupled, it kind of ticked a lot of boxes for us as a platform to sign off against.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question asks, how did you manage the shift to a customer-centric approach? Was there much resistance, and if so, how did you overcome this?
So, good question. The nice thing about some of you working in sort of marketing, sales, and environments where you're trying to deal with resistance, there's probably the least resistance I'd ever have in moving to a customer-centric approach, because pretty much nobody argues what the customer says. And when you talk to sales and say, listen, do you want a bigger voice within a forum on what we create for your customers? It's a no-brainer. It's very much a commitment and a support from sales on that. So there really wasn't any resistance there. I think the only resistance was typically when you're trying to ensure consistency in message and in brand and creative. The resistance was probably more, top-down, making sure that we didn't sort of go off and create wacky things that would impact brand consistency or brand identity. And I think as long as you can show that you're a responsible brand advocate and a marketeer while supporting the local requirements, you can quickly overcome that resistance. So again, really no resistance from a local sales point of view. I think it's more about making sure that there's consistency in how you message.
Perfect, thank you. Our next one is, do you use buyer personas as a basis of developing relevant content? And if so, what is your process for developing these?
We do use buyer personas. I personally don't at the UK level. They do shape our campaign strategy. In terms of the process, I'll be very honest, I don't know the process of creating the buyer personas. That they're very much handled from our global marketing team in terms of as they develop the campaigns there. So in that sense, obviously, at a local level, we actually divide up sort of buyers by ITDM, C-suite, and BDM, and then within C-suite we actually categorize obviously CMO, CTO, CFO as key areas of the C-suite area. So not in any polished structured manner, but we certainly do develop sort of descriptors or description basis for that, so we can help do our marketing at a local level. But the real buyer persona process is handled through global marketing. So fortunately, I can't talk to the detail on that.
No problem, thank you. Our next question asks, how did LinkedIn influence your media plan?
So just maybe take a step back. When we looked at media consumption, the first protocol was actually looking at a media audit, and we used a media agency to do that, to then look at media consumption by buyer group. When we realized that a big part of the media mix should be in paid social as well as earned and owned social, there was definitely a need to sort of look at Twitter, but also more importantly look at LinkedIn as a big B2B platform. The other part in terms of the C-suite targeting, LinkedIn is one of a few, but a very effective platform to target C-suite sort of customers. So that was one influence in terms of you just have the ability to actually reach those customers in a very targeted fashion. So LinkedIn didn't necessarily influence it, but certainly propagated and helped sort of bring it about faster.
Can you give an example of how you use video to respond to the trend you mentioned where customers are relying on video more for learning?
That was, I believe, out of one of our research, and I don't know whether it was a Forrester research or one of the IDC researchers. So to be honest, I can't remember which one, but we drew from that. So it wasn't a Dell research; it was a industry research.
Perfect. How do you assess the relationship between content marketing and lead generation?
Well, a number of ways. It depends what your objective of the content is. So if the objective of the content marketing is more on the awareness consideration layer, then typically at that layer, it's less connected to a lead at that point. Although there is sort of cookie nurturing and different ways to sort of take that lead or take that contact through a journey, and that's used through different types of technology and platforms. I think if it's content syndication, then it's a bit easier to connect to a lead. It's more further down the journey, more further down the funnel, so then allows you to then to do that. So we obviously have content partnerships, and as content partners are then obviously capturing leads through click-throughs, downloads, etc. Based on re-engagement rates then and retargeting, you can then obviously take that further down to a lead, a marketing-ready lead that then needs to be nurtured.
Thank you. Our next question asks, how long do you think it took to create momentum from initial launch of your marketing campaign to customer purchase of solutions?
Good. I mean, there's no one single answer on that. I mean, it's a good question. I think one we're always wrestling with. I think it really depends on the solution. So a client solution can go really rapid. A large infrastructure deal, it can be anything up to 2 years. It can also depend on whether the customer is an existing customer or an acquisition customer. An acquisition customer will take much longer. And then as an existing customer, it's how much engagement you have in terms of the portfolio. Is it just a share of wallet expansion? And are they really engaged? So there's kind of that, what type of customer they are, what type of solution they're buying, and it will vary depending on that.
Thank you. Our next question asks, what research did you do to identify the most appropriate content for your target audience, and who did this for you?
So, there's different types of research. There's research that has come through from companies like IDG and IDC. There's, and we work with them fairly regularly. There's research from Forrester. And then we, at a local level, we use a media agency to do media content research. MediaCom, one of our big partners that does that for us.
Thank you. And do you feel that producing a structured content calendar has helped increasing your engagement on social media?
Absolutely. So this is one of the things where I think, people talk about social being viral and, all the rest of it, and obviously still ensuring that people are authentic. I mean, one of the things that we have within the company is what we call social media and community courses, so SMAC training that we do. And one of the key things I always tell everybody is don't just go talk about your work, and don't just talk about what you're selling and all the rest of it. And there's various code of conducts and how you do that. But there's, more importantly, there's authenticity that any person needs to have. So that was really important. I think the nice thing was around the Commonwealth Games is it's something that people get passionate about. It's sport, so you can talk about things in the background that have been done, but getting that mix is important in terms of between interests as well as things you're doing for work. to keep that authenticity in the content you're sharing. So definitely the structure was important, but in the background, having those do's and don'ts was really important too.
Referring back to your sponsorship at the Commonwealth Games, did you notice an increase of brand awareness from that?
Yeah, absolutely. That was that survey that I was sharing with you, the uptick in the awareness. So certainly for those customers seeing that, there was a greater awareness or appreciation of what we're about. So definitely paid off.
The next question asks, what was your most influential form of content during your E2E Solutions program?
There were two pieces. I would say the infotisement, which was a scrolling piece that went across 3 pages, and despite my worries that 3 pages might be too long, it was interesting that customers did actually scroll through and read the content. The second piece was a rich video content, so a short video that we'd work through with the Financial Times, and that was posted out across different spaces.
And how did you find out what your customers wanted from that program?
That was part of the research, the Vanson Bourne study, where the customers really talked about their concerns from a security point of view, what they're concerned about, what they were investing in, where their worries were really, and that allowed us to then create content that actually tapped into those emotions.
And our next question asks, what is the process for budget allocation?
Process of budget allocation. I don't know. There's a number of different processes. Depends. Budget allocation at a local level or budget allocation to the UK. Maybe I'll answer it from the local level. The process of budget allocation is a kind of an alignment and agreement across what I call solution spaces with GMs, and then where we want to put our investment that will drive leads, support revenue targets, support business targets, as well as support pure awareness, and obviously getting that balance right is important. So I think the key thing is, as long as you achieve your overall business targets on pipeline or revenue and training and supporting sales, then if you can achieve that, then you can free up a lot more around the awareness piece that was certainly allowing us to sort of change the perceptions on end-to-end solutions.
Perfect, thank you. How did you establish the direction of your content, and why did you choose certain platforms?
Well, I would say, similar to the way I answered before, if I'm understanding the question. Again, the direction of the content from what went into the content was against the research. The platforms were based on what we could realistically measure, as well as would allow us to achieve the reach. And then there's obviously various platforms that allow us to do sort of content distribution, whether it's Outbrain, Turn, Adacada. These are kind of programmatic type technology platforms that allow us to then be more effective in content distribution.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question asks, what level of engagement would be ideal in order to not cross the boundaries of privacy or infringement on the privacy of the set of the customers?
Could you give me a bit more context of that question?
So they've just asked, so what levels of content would be ideal in order to not cross the sort of the boundary of privacy?
I'm sorry, not really sure what the question is asking. In terms of crossing boundaries, we're not using customer content themselves. Research that was shared was anonymous, so that wouldn't be doing anything in terms of privacy. Is it more being... Sorry, I'm not clear about what the question is asking.
I believe it's in terms of, so if you're producing content and then using customers' data to build that content, what bits of data would you use in order to build your content that wouldn't be invading their privacy?
So typically we're not using customer data, first of all, to talk about content. Unless we're talking about the solution guide, maybe the gentleman's referring to that, where we use customer stories. And I mean, that is a sort of very rigid process of, customer approval and checks. And only when they're absolutely happy about, what goes into, what is written there, is it then relayed. And typically, it's good advertising for the customer themselves. So certainly, the rigidity in the approval and sign-up process is something that will protect and ensure that the customer's happy in anything that's been shared or discussed about them.
Brilliant, thank you. And our last question is, what was the most successful communications channel for you during the E2E Solutions program in terms of engagement?
I think LinkedIn was really great. I think some of the key newspapers like The Guardian and FT were really good channels, sort of digital. Those are probably the two key ones, I would say.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Simon, and thank you to all of our participants in today's webinar. But unfortunately, that's all we have time for. And we hope you found this information and dialogue valuable and useful, and would love to hear any feedback or suggestions you may have via a brief survey, which will appear on your screen shortly. Just another quick reminder that a link to the recording of the event will be emailed to you in the next couple of days, and you'll also be able to access it on our opinion page. Goodbye until next time.